content, and unique activities into the broader conversations about our watershed. The collective is excited to bring today's plenary presentation to you all. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. The session is being recorded and is hosted in webinar format, so all engagement will be over chat box or Q&A. Please use these functions if you have any questions throughout the session. If you have any technical difficulties, please send a message in the chat box and we'll do our best to help you out. Lastly, the rest of the forum schedule can be found on Whova. I'll now turn it over to our main presenters, Stephen Bradley and Rodette Jones, who will take it from here.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Let's see, I'm having difficulties here.
You can see us.
Here we are. Good morning, everybody. My name is Stephen Bradley, and this is
Rodette Jones.
And we're going to talk to you today about the panel. And I'm going to now turn on share our screen here real quick. Very good. So this is art, science, storytelling, bridging community and the environment. And today's November 4th, 9 a.m., a little bit after 9 a.m. I want to thank everybody for showing up today. So Rodette was going to talk a little bit about this scene here.
So this scene is community engagement. We want to have the community involved in any project that you do. And this is Curtis Bay. What it was a old alley that was full of debris and stuff. And Steve and I had decided to apply for funds for doing murals for this alley. And we reached out to the community to come and paint the alley. At the end of the alley with the straw hat on is me. And what we did was we just came together and painted the alley.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a brief moment. So to my right is Rodette Jones, longtime community member at Curtis Bay in Brooklyn. And this is her on the right in the garden, the Filbert Street Community Garden. And this is me on the left.
So me and Steve had formed a bond about 10 years ago. It was in 2010 to do community projects in and around Curtis Bay in the Brooklyn area.
And so before Rodette and I talk about those projects, I'm going to give a little bit of brief background on my work. I've been involved in solid waste for most of my life. Since graduating with my MFA, I've been exploring the meaning of trash found in the environments from a translocal perspective. Translocal has to do with anything that occurs within a community impacts other communities, simply put. And an example of that, and before I go to that, this is a photograph on the left is me tracking dumpsters, trash cans, city workers in Hull, UK. And again, I'm not going to talk very long about this. And then on the right is documentation of trash found in various parts of Hull. But I've been doing this all over the world. And so another example of translocal is climate change that's occurring, for instance, extreme droughts, and then extreme rain occurrences that are within very close proximity of one another. Another example, a very concrete example, is the 2011 Japanese tsunami created by the earthquake that catapulted tons of debris into the North Pacific Ocean, some of which landed on the west coast of the United States a few weeks later. Rather than making representational objects out of trash, I've been treating it more like a form of contemporary archaeology. The meaning and the value is the thing in itself. Picking it up, tagging, reframing it, branding it, selling it back to the consumer as artifacts of consumption. Often I tag it with a location, time, and date that it was found. I might tell a story about the trash based on my experience in that place where it was picked up. My MFA was in painting, though I became discouraged with the solitary art form and turned to other forms of artistic expression that borrows from other disciplines such as archaeology, cultural anthropology. And in the arts, I adopted more of a performative approach, installation, and hybrids of art forms that sometimes appear more like science. Perhaps you could say a non-aesthetic looking form is what I've approached. During this period, I also became more interested in the role of sound in a broad perspective, deep listening, acoustic ecology, and experimental music. Inspired by nature's bioacoustics, natural occurring sonic phenomena, listening to sound that is often difficult to hear without technology, such as underwater earth vibrations and so forth. And then I'm interested in revealing habitats that are very difficult to hear otherwise. Part of my interest is the role of storytelling, sound telling, that might be linked to a place or situation. Finally, where the art takes place is as important as the art, including community in this process as a major goal, which is where Rodette and I come together, and where we met 10 years ago in Brooklyn, Curtis Bay. But before I talk about this work with Rodette, I would like to talk about the next two slides. So many of you received some interesting things in the mail. Some of you did. And so this is an example of some of the trash that I found in different places all over the world, which I've shared with some of you in the audience today. Some of these are tagged with a location, date, and time found, and with a brief description similar to archaeology. Though I'm twisting this a bit by repackaging trash and then adding or assigning value and then selling it back to the consumer, though you got these for free. So I'm very interested in your comments about what you received in the mail. And if you wouldn't mind inserting that in the chat, and then I can look at it later through the Whova system. So now Rodette and I are going to talk a little bit about our projects over the last decade. The portion of this talk is ranges from about 10 years, and we've compressed this down to 2 or 3 projects. Each project leads to a new project, a new form of support, sometimes results in returning to the same place, building upon the failures and the successes, improving and strengthening those relationships with the goal of strengthening community connections to one another in the environment. A really important part of my process as an artist is learning to listen and listening to learn.
So on the left, we have Jason Reed, the former garden manager of Filbert Street Garden in Curtis Bay. He went and attained a space through the Adopt-A-Lot program of Baltimore City, and he decided to do a community garden there. So we have the students from UMBC, which are doing a little outdoor workshop in reference to the upcoming projects that we are planning to have at the Filbert Street Garden. I may add that Filbert Street Garden is a food desert, and we deal with a lot of food insecurities. And our main goal is to feed the community of Curtis Bay and the surrounding communities.
Also, it's really important to point out that this group of people you see here talking to Jason, who's in the red, is 2 different classes. So our idea in the class is 1 foot in the classroom in the university and 1 foot in the community.
So the next slide is we had decided to do a fundraiser for the garden manager position at Filbert Street Garden. So we enthuse the community partners to do the fundraiser at a church, a local church. And here we have the seniors of Curtis Bay, which we included. Also, we have the students of Ben Franklin. We have some of their artwork on display that we're going to do for auction, and also students and the our college students that's in the background. Let me add.
So we sold tickets. We also had a Kickstarter, and the tickets included dinner, a nutritional meal, as well as opportunity to buy or auction. We auctioned off the art, so it was opportunity to buy art. And the artworks were made by Ben Franklin High School students and our university students and myself. And here's an example of some of the artworks that were sold. And this line of photographs of trash. Again, I always think about when I do works in community is I have my eye on the ground and eye on the community. So in that collaboration, I'm looking at solid waste. And part of this is raising consciousness about the trash, removing it and getting rid of that psychological impacts that has on community. And this is another project that Rodette will talk about.
So to the left, you will see pictures which were inserted, and the participants that were at the fundraiser had made towels for the garden. So everybody had to use their little creative juices to do towels or what spoke with them. Somebody thought about the Key Bridge and roses, and it was a lot of creative thoughts and the towels. So what we did with the towels was made a bench with the towels. And to the right of it is the cart that we use to go around the community to to do fresh fruits and vegetables. I must say that the cart was made by recycled parts that says Filbert Street Garden on it. So we look again and see time and time again that we using the recyclable items that are in the community to build stuff.
Also, a little backstory about this tricycle and cart is one of our students in the class was working for a nonprofit in Washington, D.C., and they convinced the agency to donate this tricycle. And then my students and Nicole King's students, who was from the American Studies class, collaborated to decorate this and get it functioning and getting it back in repair and decorated and so forth. And then it was used to transport the food around the community. And then we're going to switch now to another project. This is also in Brooklyn, Maryland, right next door to Curtis Bay. And this is the Enoch Pratt Free Library. So simultaneously, as we're working on, as Rodette and I are collaborating, I'm also working on other projects. So this is the Enoch Pratt Free Library. The librarian approached me and says, "Can you do anything about these walls?" And so through numerous conversations and negotiation, we were able to get the walls repaired. And then my students and myself and several community members joined arms. And we worked with Ben Franklin High School students, Marie Ferring Elementary Middle School students, as well as community members that were attending the library. And we came up with some designs which were approved by the head of the library, and the CEO of the library had to approve these designs. And then we implemented. It took us about a year to paint these designs. And then the next slide is, Rodette, you want to say anything about?
Okay, so actually, when we were doing this project at the library, a little boy was looking at the paintings that we were doing on the library, and he was like, can I actually paint, do a painting there or whatever? And of course, the students, the UMBC students, they was like a little shocked that he would want to do the painting, and they was more concerned of him messing up the painting. But, we just wanted to use his enthusiasm and creativity to paint. So I would paint out the brown, where the
It's a little squirrel,
squirrel.
and the 9-year-old painted this future that he envisioned, which is a car, house, and clouds. It's a little bubble that the squirrel is dreaming on the left. And my students said, "Oh my God, this doesn't fit in the design." I said, "Well, you're artists, so figure it out." And so they came up with the idea that the squirrel is dreaming about a future. 2 days later, the young 9-year-old dropped by with his family and pointed out the painting. And then the father turned to me and says, "Nobody ever should touch this painting or deface it. I'll make sure that never happened." And so I think the really important point here is including community members into the process guarantees 90% of the time that it's going to be well protected.
Okay, and so this slide in particular, we had involved the councilman, our former councilman, Mr. Edward Reisinger. We had got funds from the city government, and also we had the input of the community to come, and of course Steve Bradley and the community, as we see here, the community, to paint the container, which is still located at Filbert Street Garden, that the residents of the community and I would say partners and everything, which put their footprint on that container. And as you see, they're painting it, and it's sustainable. And also I can point out that it does have what we call a green roof that's on the top of it. So, which was donated by Mike Furbish, which was in Brooklyn. So everybody is like a joint effort of unity in the community to get the projects done.
This is also an example of bringing in the biodiversity study that I'm involved with IMET and Bugs, the Baltimore Underground Science Space. So this is a cellular structure that borrowing from cell structures like plants and leaves, for instance. And then I used a Skittle color scheme, background color, and a kind of urban camouflage concept. And then community members could paint within those small areas their ideas of their future. And next, we're going to go to the Alley Art project, which Rodette started talking about earlier.
So the Alley Art project was really a venture for the whole community to come out and to infuse their creative ideas in the community. As you see, everyone had decided to draw different objects. I see the ravens up there. We thought about bees and the Wario bird, whatever came to mind, they decided to draw and paint. That's what they did. It was for a project of young and old folks to come out and join in. It was exciting.
And because this alley was so packed with trash, we had to actually spend 2 or 3 days cleaning it before we could even start painting. And because it's so large, it's a block long alleyway, I had this idea of creating water puddles or reflection pools. So I would create these very simple shapes on the ground first, and then community members would come behind and then paint their ideas. Here's some more examples. I think the one on the lower left is a 6-year-old, the top left is a 9-year-old, and the top right is a 8-year-old, I believe, and the bottom is an adult. So it was a very interesting, inclusive project. Also, it's very important to point out that that alleyway is clear now and trash can be picked up, and it's really improved the neighborhood vastly. So this slide here, conceptually, I think is really important to point out that this whole process is like a spiral. Often we come back to a place that we've already been working in and improve various projects we started. And Rodette's going to take it from here.
So this project in particular is also located in Brooklyn. Is right directly across from the Enid Pratt Library. It's on Tapsco and 3rd Street. The handicap accessible ramps that we have decided to do murals on each of the 4 corners. And as you can see, we decided to do this right by the Boys and Girls Club. The community came out again and used our creative juices and made the curbs, as I say, it was a curb appeal project that we decided to make it more appealing to the community within the main corridor. And
so this is a very similar to the cargo crate in the Filbert Street Community Garden, the alleyway art. So I would come in and we had to do a foundational painting on the ground to seal the concrete. So there's a lot of background work that takes place, getting permission to work on the sidewalks, had to go through the Department of Transportation. So there's a great deal of background negotiations that takes place to make these projects work. And then I would come in and I would do some flat colors on the concrete, and then I'd make these bubbles based on biological forms, again, borrowing from the cellular structure. Also, during this period of time, there's that biodiversity study that's taking place. So I'm bringing in the list of organisms and animals that are ID'd in the community and offering that as some of the subject matter that community members can borrow from. But I think it's a really important to point out is there's like 7 or 8 people working collectively together to make this function. And it's really remarkable that we've been doing this for 10 years and still working and still making the community a much better place. And it's very important to point out that the community is a contributor to the process of identifying the problem and contributing ideas towards solutions.
May I ask one insert on that? So all the projects that we did, we feel as though that when we having community engagement, community putting their handprint on whatever projects that we're doing, I can say comfortably that it has not been any vandalism to the projects that we have inserted in the community.
A very, very good point. And that was something that the Enoch Pratt Free Library, for instance, was having a lot of vandalism, but after the murals were painted, the interior of the library was renovated up to almost $150,000 renovation. So now I'm going to switch a little bit to during this period of time that I'm doing these community projects in collaboration with Rodette and other community members. I'm also making artworks that are inspired by my involvement in the community. This project's called Invasive Materials, and it's looking at the trash within the community and playing around with metaphors. This is basically an idea around the clash of art and science. Art is coming out of a need within the community to address issues around trash. This particular piece is inspired by Masonville Cove, which is just around the corner from Brooklyn Curtis Bay. It's a coastal area. And I collected all the trash at the base of this sculpture and then used a white picket fence as a kind of metaphor of keeping that trash contained within this area underneath the easel. And the idea is the picket fence is a metaphor of how we sort of demarcate our land and keep people out of that land. But this is playing with a metaphor of keeping trash kind of contained within this particularly demarcated area. The image at top of this panel is using the Keith Porter Imaging Facility at UMBC. I'm collaborating with a scientist, an imaging scientist, who is looking at microplastics and biomes, and I'm exposing sort of hidden trash within our water supply. And this next piece is the latest project that I've been working on with Eric Schott at the Institute of Marine Technology in Environmental Studies. And this is taking scientific information and then spinning it through visual arts medium. So this is an installation where I focus on what's called a biodisc. It's the center of the installation, which is the aquarium, has a living device that that's used by the scientists to study the biodiversity. So this biodisc lives in the Inner Harbor for about a year, and then it lived in this gallery for about 6 weeks. And the scientists do DNA sequencing and use this as a way to understand life and the diversity within the Inner Harbor. So I also, within this installation, I'm using biosurveillance. So I'm looking at micro perspectives within this aquarium. Also on the left of the installation is trash from above. And then on the right is trash below, and it's sort of like how trash is stressing our ecosystem. And then there's a terrarium on the left underneath the trash. So there's two living organisms in this installation. And then the last part of the slideshow is talking about the various collaborators in the science community. So this slide shows bringing the community of scientists together through various organizations, through the National Aquarium, IMET, Bugs, the Baltimore Underground Space. So this is where I interface with the scientists through the Community Science Project, using the arts and social engagement to connect communities to their science ecology of their places. And so you can see the various scientists. That's Eric Schott in the center with the seine. He's sampling the water, and then one of his interns, and then Charmaine and Curtis Bennett to the right, top, both with the aquarium. And both Rodette and I have worked with Curtis Bennett within the community, who they're doing community engagement and in community science. And then the bottom right is a floating wetlands that Charmaine Dellenberg has invented through the aquarium, through the support of the aquarium. And this is in the Inner Harbor, and it's living, and it's actually attracting all kinds of organisms within the community. I also see my role within this community using my artistic sensibility as a way to create information design, to take the science and try to make it into something that is understood. Though it is complicated, particularly when you get into DNA sequencing, which this explores. It basically demystifies the whole process of the biodiversity study. So it's a pretty detailed, but the lower left, you see a number of the community members that are involved in this process. And then the actual DNA sequencing that takes place, and then the organisms in the second column on the bottom. You see all the organisms that have been identified. Then the DNA data is sent to an international database so you insert all that DNA information, and then that system tells us what organisms are in the Inner Harbor. And the point of DNA is that it will expose and reveal organisms that are not visible in the harbor. And there's a lot of life in the harbor. And I think part of my goal is to bring this information back to the community. So the latter part of today, we'd like to open up the conversation with you as an audience. Each community has its own challenges, its own history, and requires various forms of engagement and a kind of sensitivity, going back to the notion of deep listening to the community and paying attention more to what the community is saying and not what I want to say, for instance. So it's really important that Rodette, when she speaks, I need to listen and pay attention to those concerns. So we would like you today to describe some of your successes and challenges in your community. What has worked, what has not worked, and how can we as a team help you in these next steps. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and switch it over to, if I can get out of this, having trouble. Oh, I know what I need to do. Go back to, sorry, here we go. Now I have control. Great. So Erin then is going to vet questions with the audience. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Stephen and Rodette. And I say, as we wait for some of our participants to put their thoughts in the chat box, there are a couple of questions going all the way back to the archaeological trash that we all received that I think would be great to answer here. So the first one, we have a question from Selena in Hoover. What is the most common fate of the repackaged trash? Does it usually just end up in the trash again?
You know, that's a very good question, because part of the idea of giving this back away, actually, I usually sell this, and then it's considered sort of an artifact of that consumption. So it's been tagged like archaeology. So it's being collected as artworks. But I thought it was very interesting that you as an audience would receive this and because there was no explanation in the package, right? You just received this. So I'm very interested in that first that first impact of receiving this and like, what is this and why is this? So typically it's saved. I have buyers of my trash from years ago that still have them hanging on their walls as artworks, artifacts of consumer culture. That's a great question, though.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. So now going to the paintings and the work with the community. So for Stephen and Rodette, we have a question from Renee on Hoover. How long do the ground paintings last, and how do they get maintained so they don't degrade or detract the look of the community?
I'll first talk about the murals at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. I had agreed if any vandalism had occurred on the murals, that I would come back in and I'd repaint, and that I'm available to come in and do repairs and any kind of touch up. Well, those were completed in 2013, and we have not had to go back and touch them up. We use the highest quality paints possible. It's a medium called Nova. It's typical or traditional mural painting pigment, and it's got a UV filter built into the pigment. So once you paint it, it's there for a long time. And then maybe Rodette could speak to the sidewalks. That was a little more complicated because you're walking on the murals and it's being exposed to all kinds of weather. And I was very worried about that. But I'm wondering if Rodette might want to speak to that.
So the paintings that we did on the sidewalks, they are still there. They haven't faded or anything. I think it's the grade of paint that we use. I mean, sometimes you take shortcuts and you get shortcuts, meaning that, results. The results is, cheap paint, every 2 years you got to go and touch up. But we had used a higher grade paint on the sidewalk murals, and the higher grade paint, we got higher grade results. So we hadn't been back to retouch the sidewalks because there's no need to. And also the paint on the container that's located at Filbert Street Garden is the same result. We used the highest grade paint that we could use for that container. We had to prime it and then paint it. And actually, it worked out also. It looks like the paint has not faded or anything. So we have great results.
And what Rodette is speaking to is it's if you use cheap materials, you get cheap results. So I think that's really critical. We also, before we even painted, we had the Department of Transportation come in and blast the concrete, the sidewalks. So they were clean, purified, basically. And then we sealed it with, the yellow lines in the middle of the street. We used that high quality paint medium before we even painted on top of that. And then I see a question in the chat about sealing it. And then we used a UV sealer on both, all of the paints that we do. We seal it with waterproofing. I'm also very mindful of, here we are talking about environment and then using toxic materials. So I'm always like looking at the safest paint possible, particularly with leaching from the paint going into the water and then going into the storm drain, ending up in our harbor. So I've done a lot of background research and using the highest quality, least amount of damage that could take place to the environment.
Yeah, environmental safe paint.
Exactly.
Great. Well, we have a couple of questions about the process. And so we've heard on Whova and in the chat box here, how do you survey the community to see where their interests lie, or how do you get approval from such as the library to make sure you can do these projects? Can you speak to these types of processes?
So first, to survey the community, we do surveys in the community in reference to going to community meetings and just opening up, first seeing what they would like in the community, doing a survey and some of the ideas that we can bounce back and forth for how they would like the community to be improved. So we take those ideas and compile them, and then we look for funding through city government or whatever to fund the project.
We also meet, when we have these meetings, we have art materials that are out on the tables. And for instance, I brought in the biodiversity study. So I showed them the organisms that were living in the inner harbor. And we would look at indigenous plants and animals within the community. I happen to also photograph constantly within the community. So I would photograph plants and animals that I would see, and I bring those into the conversation. And for instance, some community members, well, I can't draw and I can't paint. And I say, well, that's where the idea came to me, to create smaller areas within a larger space that is manageable. And I often would say, you can't paint unless you start painting. So learning how to paint is just like bicycle riding. I can't teach you how to paint with passion, but I can teach you how to paint some general shapes. And then many of these paintings are collaborative. For instance, we had one student who painted shapes of birds, but couldn't paint eyes of the birds. And then another student painted the eyes and the beak and the more details, the feathers on the birds. So it really does truly become collaborative. And our egos are a collective ego. It's not an individual ego. And yes, we do sometimes run into those egos. But a part of my ego as an artist is typically we think artists create their artwork in a studio and then they kind of expose it in a gallery. Well, I'm the complete opposite. I make work in community. Sometimes I'm making the artworks with others within the community. So I'm sort of demystifying the process. And Erin, did I get all of those points in that?
Yes, that was wonderful. We have a question that came in that is about this connection with the community that you make. And this is from Julie on Whova. It's easy to be perceived as an outsider in a community. What are some of the best strategies you've used to build rapport and facilitate conversations to produce products that are meaningful and authentic to the partners?
Great question. In fact, that's central to my approach, is listening to the community. So in the early stages of my relationship with Brooklyn Curtis Bay, I was looked on as a little bit suspicious. So many community members would ask me, why am I there? Why do I keep showing up? And I talk about my own personal experience of growing up in a military family. And my first 40 years of my life, I was born in Great Falls, Montana, but I lived there only about 3 or 4 months. My father was in the Air Force. And then I lived in Spain, I lived in Korea. So my connection to place, and it's probably my obsession with stuff that I find or trash, is me trying to hold on to some piece of a place. And so my own searching for my relationship to a place is probably my motivation, is trying to find my home. And so Brooklyn Curtis Bay I consider my home. And these are close friends and collaborators. But you raised something that is really important. Many community members told me early on, I said, we've had numerous people come and do projects with us. Then they disappear. We never see them again. And I said, in the early stages, one of the first things, and I can't believe I said this, I said, I plan on being here at least 10 years. And then I'll evaluate it. So I'm going on 12 years now with the community. And I think what you bring up is something essential to community engagement, is really staying with the community through thick and thin. There's been times when I just said, this is not going to work. And I would be honest with community members. I said, I just don't know how we're going to do this if we don't get this. And community members would scramble and come back with solutions and possibilities. And that's what kept me going, is hearing those community members really wanting something. If I didn't have community members, this wouldn't work. And if community members were not participating, this would not work. And it wouldn't work if I just did this one time and then went off into my studio. So part of my relationship with the community is the inspiration for doing what I do as an artist in my private world that I see one foot in the studio, one foot in the community.
Thanks, Stephen. And I feel like this also goes to a phrase that you had in the presentation, listening to learn and learning to listen. And when we had spoken a couple of weeks ago, you even said that listening and being this new person in a community, you're almost like a conductor. You're trying to conduct the electricity and help like initiate and create this spark, bring in those resources and that to make it happen. Can you speak any more to that concept of the listening to learn and learning to listen?
Yeah, in the early stages, I began working with Ben Franklin High School. So I set up, I got permission from the high school principal. They had a program they were experimenting with called 4+1. Students would go to school, a traditional school, a little bit longer day, Monday through Thursday, and then Fridays were an open session for students to do remedial sort of learning. If they missed a class, they could make it up on that Friday. Or if students had who were very advanced, wanted to do internships. So I set up a studio in the school, a stop motion animation program. And so I would work 3 hours a week, sometimes 4 hours, with students who would float in and out of the classroom. And I asked the students, I said, do you know who your elders are in the community? I said, well, we don't trust the elders. And it gave me the idea. And at the same time I was working with the youth, I had been working with seniors at the Curtis Bay Rec Center. And they were doing flower designs. And in fact, I asked them the first day I met with them, I said, what can I do to help you? And I said, we'd like to learn about flower making. And I said, okay. So I went to Michael's art store and I bought just a variety of materials. I had no idea what I was doing. And then I brought all the materials home to my studio and I made about 5 or 6 flowers. I said, this is kind of fun. So using crepe paper. And so I learned how to make flowers. And I came in to the seniors and I showed them what I made. And they said, oh my God, we could do that. And so I was teaching them how to make stuff that they were interested in learning. And then I said, well, would you do me a favor and come with me to Ben Franklin High School and meet some of the seniors at the high school? So I did a project in the high school where I had elders come into the high school and tell their stories about their past. And then I had the youth tell the stories about their potential future. And then I had art paper in the middle of the table and I recorded about 20 hours of conversations, very intense. And that is what I mean by listening. And I would step back and just allow things to unfold. Sometimes they weren't going like I'd want it to go, but community members and the youth were sort of directing the conversation. And I basically, if the conversation would die down, then we would make artworks. And then they'd start talking about the artwork. And so, for instance, there is a tower in Brooklyn, I think it was at Garrett Park or maybe one of the parks that got torn down because there was a lot of problems. And many community members remember that tower as a lookout, and they could see Baltimore City from Brooklyn Curtis Bay. And they were sad that had to go away. And so they did a drawing of the tower. Youth didn't even know that the tower ever existed. So making those connections, I felt like a conductor. I was building capacity with different unlikely members of the community, bringing them together very carefully, orchestrating these conversations, and then stepping back and allowing it to just unfold. And the bonds were incredible. And many of the elders had never been in the high school as a high school. Many of them had been there as elementary children, but never as a high school student. So that's one technique that we used, or I used.
Great, thank you. I have a question here that's a bit 3,000 foot, very high level.
I love those.
So, we've been talking about engaging with the community and then, these types of art projects and the processes. But when we look at this higher level, how long does it take to go from an idea to this completed project, that whole arc?
Well, the cargo crate would be a good one to talk about because CSX had donated the cargo crate to the Filbert Street Community Garden.
Yeah, so CSX had to donate the cargo crate. So to get the cargo crate from them, they had to get one available. So I'd say maybe about 2 or 3 months for that. And then Process had to write a grant to Home Depot because they contribute X amount of dollars to community. And they gave me a grant for $250. So that was enough money to do the prime for that, the primer paint, to buy the primer paint. Then I had to get another grant to get the paint. And that was through the city of Baltimore. So, it's like time frame that they beautification grants from the city. There's a certain time frame that you can apply for the grants. So I give it about at least 6 months to get the actual supplies and resources to do the project. And then you have to look at the time frame because it's an outdoor project, what time of year you want to implement the project. So we choose the summer for that, but it couldn't be too hot because Steve had little problems with his skin. So we had to do it when it was cooler. So I would say a year,
It took us about a year to do that. And,
right.
And the Enoch Pratt Free Library took about, it was about 14, 15 months. Right. We also took a break from the summer because it was too hot to paint.
Right.
Also, Rodette had contacted me about the cargo crate, and I went and looked at it, and I said, we need to prime it. And I said, I wouldn't want to do the priming if I could help it. And so she figured that out. And when I came back, it was perfect. And then there was this visiting group of kids from Kansas? Kansas, and they're a religious organization, and they travel to different parts of the U.S. and do volunteer work. And somehow they discovered the Filbert Street Community Garden. They showed up. And so I had them do the basic drawing of the skittle designs, and I did one or two, and then I basically coached. So we did that in one afternoon. So the beauty is leveraging groups of people to do certain parts of the project really helps me if I'm going to be involved in the creative process.
And to the library, speaking to the library, as same project, well, the mural was done, which implemented the librarian who was ready, which was Miss Swartz, who was getting ready to retire. But when one of the CEOs from downtown came to the library and they seen how pretty the mural was, and they was like, wow, the outside looked better than the inside. So they was like, we got to get the inside done. So that incited them, city government, to allot funds to redo the inside of the library, and she decided to stay on to make sure everything was done before she retired.
And the library is a community center. It really is, for many of the community members, the only place they have access to internet, computers, so job hunting. But there's also a lot of wellness events, nutritional events cooking that takes place within the community center. So the generosity of the art making, actually, if you looked at dollar value, was almost $200,000 of improvements in the library just from that mural, which is probably the most successful project we pulled off in the 10 years that we've been doing this.
That's phenomenal. Thank you both so much. Before we close out, any last minute, words or advice for any of our audience members who might be trying to do art projects with communities?
Community engagement. Lots of community engagement. Don't take your project there and don't think that you're going to just do it by yourself.
Those are words of wisdom there from experience.
Fantastic. Steve, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say that, what inspires me is Rodette. Rodette gives me hope that, and I feel like I'm part of this community. It's a family. And I have multiple communities that I'm part of. I'm in an academic environment. I teach at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. But what I see as a community is a teaching tool for my students at the university. So we didn't talk about this, but a number of the students that worked with us, for instance, at the fundraiser at Red Emma's for the Filbert Street Community Garden funds that we raised, many of those students have stayed in the community and have joined the community and are working in the community. So those are some of the perfect circles that I couldn't invent that. I couldn't make that up. So there's 2 or 3 students that have decided to stay in Baltimore and to continue doing this work. So that gives me great pleasure. Unfortunately, I won't be around forever. So to me, that makes me feel good about people are taking the torch and continuing to carry it with the same vision.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Well, thank you, Stephen and Rodette, for that fantastic presentation. I would love for us to give a virtual round of applause, but we're on webinar, so I will just do it myself. This was beautiful. We'll get some claps in the chat box, hopefully. You can provide us feedback on this session by clicking Rate Session on the session page in Whova. And you can also share your experience and your outdoor surroundings with us on social media. Our next session will start at 10:15, And we hope everyone enjoys your second day at Chesapeake Watershed Forum. Thank
Thank
you all.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.